What's up, guys? I'm Josh from Bonsai-en. I'm here in New South Wales, Australia, talking to the guys from the Bonsai Time podcast. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Bonsai Time Podcast, the tree hugger's number one spot for history, horticulture, and having fun. Today is a special collaborative series with Josh Hooson of Bonsai-en in New South Wales, Australia. We discuss the ideas of health, the mental and spiritual benefits of practicing bonsai, and how it helps the community at large. Also check out the Modern Bonsai Podcast, where you can find another discussion we had with Josh focusing on how to develop the bonsai mindset. And always remember, bonsai on!
The other day, I spent a whole day dewiring pyrocanthus, and part of that can suck because they have a lot of thorns on them, but it is relaxing just sitting there with the wire cutters, just snipping off all the wire, and you sit there with your own thoughts, and you go into kind of auto drive, and you kind of sounds funny, but you catch up with yourself. You kind of forget who you are sometimes when you're so busy.
In the zone.
Yeah.
Mm.
So uh, I would say that kind of brings us into the main topic I wanted to talk about for this was how bonsai impacts our lives, maybe how it can impact people's lives. Because as Kevin kind of alluded to in the episode we recorded for your interview, that's one thing that we're thinking about on a little bit of a deeper level. Like Kevin's got some perspective of the horticultural therapy, and I've got the perspective of someone that's kind of doing research in the medical field. So I'm like, but also we can talk about it in the context of like our inner peace and all of these other things. But that's one thing when I was kind of brainstorming in advance of us meeting today, I was thinking like a lot of the positive things that bonsai does do for us or for many people who practice it, you could find it in other hobbies or in other avenues, but that doesn't make it any less true that we can get it from doing bonsai.
Well, that's right. Like, I know a lot of people, like we spoke about in my podcast, like I'm a big car guy. And I know a lot of the car guys out there, they work really stressful jobs or jobs that are really hard on them, whether they're bricklayers or, whatever it is, coming home, disappearing into the shed and pulling the heads off a motor or,
Yeah.
something that something that might be stressful to other people, to them, that is very therapeutic. It gets them away from everything. Maybe they've got a toddler or something and they just need that time to get away from their work. They need to get away from that screaming. And for them, it's going out into the shed, ripping the heads off the motor, and that's the therapy.
Yeah.
Kevin,
Yeah.
what's your experience been as you're a student, you're a new dad, you got a lot going on in your life. How has bonsai impacted your life, I guess?
In Josh's story, I can relate. I'm blue collar trade work most of my life. Construction all around. You can read a tape measure. You can do most things on a job site in basic terms, just wear your boots and make sure you don't do something stupid. But in relation to how bonsai, I'll even go further. How has nature impacted my life, right? Because for me, this has trained me to live seasonally in the identification of like, if we look at historical cultures, they were happier because they lived seasonally. So we run our lives by the seasons of our bonsai care and practice, right? Because wintertime, we slept.
Mhm.
Springtime, it's that push. Like, let's go. Rev that engine up, get it tuned up. Summertime, okay, we're on a coastal highway. Let's keep cruising along. Look at the pretty waves, take a couple scenery shots. Sure. Fall comes in. Okay, now we gotta kind of recalibrate and go in for our hibernation. But I think I have a bias as well because growing up in Oregon, I was surrounded by nature, trees. I had a mountain view every day in my house. Fortunately, my small town. It's always just impacted me to want to be involved with nature or be present or be working with trees or plants. Um, I will say the impact I've had have been I've made the most purest friendships I've ever had in my life through bonsai. It's my biggest impact in my life now. also the fact that most people I know are pretty well acquainted in happiness with their bonsai trees. I haven't met too many people that are, you know, cranky unless their tree died. But other than that, it's a simplification for me. That's like bonsai equals happiness. Happiness equals a healthy life. That's what it is for me.
Yeah,
So,
and on the point of like the friendships that you make through bonsai, it comes pretty naturally once you get into a club and you're involved in the club. You can make a lot of new bonsai friends that way. There's all these online communities that you can join to make more bonsai friends that way. And one thing that I've heard about is the kind of like there's a loneliness crisis in America, maybe all over the world. And I don't know if it might be a trend preceding COVID, but COVID might have amped it up, you know? Uh, but I think there's just a lot of people struggling with depression or people say like, oh, I'm over past the college age, so now it's hard to make new friends. But bonsai and like having a serious hobby and having other people to do that hobby with makes it a lot easier. And it's not really something I actively think about in my life because it's just like, oh, I have all these people that I'm in regular contact with, asking them about trees, or, we just have something always to talk about. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, anytime I go to like a bonsai club or a bonsai show, because we have a few shows here and also do demonstrations around, when the club brings me up and says, "Can you come up here and do this or that?" And from the minute I get there to the minute I leave, it's just like talk, talk, talk to everybody. But
yeah.
everybody's so happy. Everybody's
Mhm.
like, it's just like I've
vibes.
never, yeah, I've never been involved in something in my life that's just so positive and uplifting and everybody wants to talk. And even if, even at these clubs, people have differences of opinion, but it's
Mhm.
like everybody's still just happy and discusses. And yeah, you go home with a bit of a hoarse throat because you've been talking for so damn long. And it's like, man, I just had the best day.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm someone that I consider myself an introvert, but then now I'm the club treasurer. So like whenever sometimes I'm presenting and I'm the club treasurer, so I've got to teach and then I've got to go handle whatever the latest finance stuff that people have to pay for. So I'm just talking to people the whole meeting, but even though I'm an introvert, I'm totally fine with it. Like maybe I'll reset a little bit afterwards, but I've got no complaints there really.
I think that's a lot of people in bonsai, specifically like majority of people I met are the introverted extroverts,
Hmm.
where like people with tattoos. Like you see people over there, like, oh, you got tattoo? What's up? Hey, we'll just do the head nod, like I see you, white guy nod, like, so how's it going? And it's that idea where it's like, oh, we have the commonality. Like I've met people I probably would never have thought I would be friends with, just based on ideologies maybe that aren't in aligned with mine. But those go to the wayside. It's about community development because the more we have the art of conversation, the more we can inherently practice the art of bonsai. you know.
And something that I've noticed, and I'd love to see a study on this if anybody could like actually find a way to do it. And I don't want to sound morbid, but the people in bonsai who die,
Hmm.
they die of really old age. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know if
Yeah,
you've noticed
yeah,
this, but like bonsai practitioners, when they pass away, they're like super old. Like they've
Hmm.
had good innings. And it's like, well, was it just the way that they lived their life that got them to that age, or was it the fact that they had just so much joy and happiness all the time that they had so much less stress? Because they say that stress causes, you
yeah,
know,
Hmm.
cardiovascular issues,
yeah. Cortisol
stressful people have
release.
heart
Yeah,
attacks and,
yeah,
whereas, yeah, as I say, even just in local clubs, like if you look at the members in your local club, when they unfortunately have a member who passes away, they're
yeah,
like close to 100 years old. And it's like,
Hmm.
all these dudes are like living for so long, where as you look at, it's weird because you look at people who do like triathlons and things like that, and a lot of those dudes are dying pretty young, like because they're pushing their bodies to the limits. Obviously, weightlifters, those kinds of things, they have all these kind of issues where their bodies begin to break down. And
Hmm.
hmm,
but yeah, there's just something about these these guys that practice bonsai. I don't know, they're going for the record of outliving their trees or something. Maybe that's what's keeping them alive.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, this is like one of the few conspiracy theories I believe in is that bonsai makes you live longer or bonsai makes you happier. So
I
maybe
mean,
I don't know if it's that out there, but I
I
could
think
totally see that being true because it does give you a purpose to wake up every day, or you've got like something that you're looking forward to doing in the garden, especially if you have a lot of trees, you can always find something. So,
we'll say I think I'm looking at it right now. Life longevity with being surrounded by plants. You look at the stress levels of people in inner cities with lack of trees or even the heat index of a city, right?
mhm.
Asphalt creates this heat index and a heat dome, if you will, comparatively to a smaller community or a community that has more trees or ground cover with plants. There is research I know of because we talked about it in my classes that shows the relation of de-stressing and healthier communities with basis of being interacting with nature and things in that way. Look at Japan. I mean, not to even lie about Japan, but there's a reason that they have some of the most blue dot centenarian people in the world. I mean, in Okinawa, there's a village that you have to be like 80, 75 or older to live there. And like, there's like 90-year-olds climbing trees and farming and picking mangoes and stuff.
Mm.
So it's like, okay, yeah, diet. But when was the last time you were in the forest? I always ask
Mm.
the question to anybody I meet as a joke, but also as a serious topic. It's like, when was the last time you were angry in a forest? And I think about it. They're like, oh wow, yeah, that's a good question. I'm like, but I also say the only caveat, depending on who you're with.
Yeah, yeah. I will say
And
one time
they're like, oh
my
yeah.
my ex-girlfriend and I got lost while we were hiking and she was really mad while we were in the forest. So doesn't work
Mm.
all the time, but
Now you know it's your ex for a reason.
yeah, yeah. Well, no
I guess
comment,
the
but
other thing that you can, the other thing I guess you could think about is like, and there must be some way to scientifically test this as well. And I mean, maybe Ryan, you can talk to this, but
Mhm.
what's the most important thing to a human is air. What do trees do? They filter the air, they
Mm.
create fresh air.
Mm.
Maybe being around trees so often, you're breathing the most pure air that you can get. And maybe that's a cause of longevity. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe actually,
actually, I could totally believe that. This is kind of a new area of research in terms of trying to understand what plants, say in an office space, how they could impact the local microenvironment, how that could impact people's health or like trapping pollution versus giving off oxygen and things like that. But there was a really interesting study that I heard about. It was kind of like a seminar on invasive species that I found on YouTube. And this guy, he was like maybe a climate researcher or like a physical science kind of guy. So he was doing a study about what the local microenvironment was in the city versus in the country, in like a rural area. And this was within the same area. So say Baltimore, Maryland. I think that was where they did the study. And so one thing that he found was that in the city, there was 100 parts per million more CO2 than in the rural countryside. And this is like maybe two places an hour apart. And so the density of the plants or in some cases the density of the people and the cars and the manufacturing that does impact the local like purity of the air. Same thing you could see with LA smog. And they
Yeah.
used to have that as a very big problem. Luckily now they've kind of made some strides against it, but there probably is some benefit to having more plants around you. That's where I'm going with this, I guess.
yeah.
No,
And
I
I
just
think, oh, sorry, go, Kevin.
I just posted in the chat here, and we can post it when we do our Instagram post. This article from Washington Post about planting trees and longer longevity in human life. Um, yeah, it's a completely awesome research topic.
Yeah, I was just going to say to kind of build on what Ryan was saying, it's not every bonsai practitioner, but most bonsai people tend to live in areas that are a little more rural because the
Mm,
properties have a little bit more backyard space, I guess you could call it, or, whatever it may be. Like,
Hmm.
I know that, since I've been into bonsai, our properties, we had a 13-acre property. Now we've gone down to a 3-acre property.
nice.
But it's always out of the hustle and bustle, and it's, surrounded by trees and nature and, all that kind of stuff. And I find that a lot with, as I said, it's not all bonsai practitioners. I've seen a lot of people who do live in the city and they make use of a small area. But a good majority of people they do live in those outer parts of town, and that could be adding to that longevity.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. A
There
simplified
was,
life, right?
yeah, there was one thing someone said earlier, I forget what it was, but it kind of made me think also about the benefits of doing bonsai as a practice in terms of having time. Actually, Josh, I think you said it about having time to reflect while you're working on a tree. Uh,
Yeah.
And I remember I was watching the movie Oppenheimer recently, and I don't know how true it is, but there was a scene where Einstein and some other famous physicists were walking through the forest, and they were saying that they do it because the trees help them think. So has that kind of been true in your lives? Have you found epiphanies, or like what have you found when you're thinking while you're working on trees? Or just what are you feeling in that moment when you're working on a tree? We could ask it many different ways.
Right.
I guess it depends on the tree for me. Like if I'm working on a really refined tree, I'm kind of, I don't want to be too Karate Kid, but close eyes, think only tree.
Yeah.
That's
Daniel-san.
yeah, like I'm really concentrating on what I'm doing. But if it's a really, day-to-day task, like a lot of the tasks here at the nursery are like taking cuttings from cutting trays and putting them into 70 ml pots.
Hmm.
And then you do that for every step of the way. They go from 70 ml pots to 100 ml pots, 100 to 150. They'll do that for 5 years. So there's always that work to do, which is very, you could call it brain dead work. It's kind of just
Hmm.
like pick it out of the tray, put it in the pot, soil goes in,
Hmm.
next one comes out.
Yep.
And, you've got, 500 cuttings in a tray, and you've got, you know 10 trays to get through it. It becomes very mind numbing, so you find yourself sitting there, and a lot of the times I'll sit there and listen to podcasts. Like I've listened to your guys podcast a lot of the times that I'm doing that, and some of the other bonsai podcasts that are available. I listen to Joe Rogan a lot.
Hmm.
um
He's
Love
got a
him
lot
or
of
hate
long
him.
episodes, so
Yeah,
yeah.
but love him or hate him, he makes you think a lot.
Hmm.
um
There's
no
some
matter
good
what
people on. Yeah.
yeah. um But if I'm sitting there, kind of not listening to everything, I think it kind of, whatever's happening in my life at that point, I kind of evaluate a lot deeper than what I kind of would if I wasn't sitting there doing that.
Hmm.
And sometimes you have these oh shit moments,
Hmm.
like, whether it might be just, something that you've said to someone and you didn't think about it. But then you sit there and you start to think with your thoughts and you go, oh shit, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Or man, maybe I need to call that person right now and just clarify and make sure that they were on the same page as what I was when we were talking about that thing. Because maybe I didn't say that correctly. Or those kind of little things pop up when you're sitting there by yourself, just thinking off into the universe.
Hmm. Yeah, I do. So when I'm working in the lab, and especially if it's like a monotonous thing, like I've done it 1,000 times, I can listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm at work. And sometimes I also listen to them at home, say if I'm working on a tree or something, or watch some TV when I'm working on a tree. But I find that there may be a limit to how much I can listen to podcasts. Like then I'm tired of it. And I definitely think that if you're doing that while you're working on a tree, you might be missing out on some time to reflect. So it's good to maybe try it both ways and like mix it up, not only do it one way all the time. But yeah, I could definitely see how working on a tree while just not listening to anything, not watching anything, especially if you're outside, you're like listening to the birds and things, you can reach a deeper level of reflection while you're doing that. And in my life, it's also been nice to slow down while work and just like appreciate what I'm doing or focus on that as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I would agree. And for me personally, as we discussed our stories in relation of like how we find our center, I'll say. um uh as of recent I've been staying up till the wee hours of the morning because I have a toddler and the only time I have is at night. Josh, when I came on, you and I were talking about that. I've been going to bed I think the last 2 weeks, like every day, like 4 or 5 in the morning. And I've been doing a lot of repotting and just preemptive styling work, or the tedious things that we didn't get to do because it got too cold or we missed it in the fall, right?
Yeah.
Um, I find myself always going back to a component of simply trying to understand what I'm doing and what I'm trying to represent with my work, whether it be with trees physically or with design work or with just being in front of a plant. Because we have those aha moments, like you stated, and it's like, oh yeah, reflection time's coming in hot today. But tomorrow maybe something different, like, oh, future tense, I have to do that, but I'm looking forward to it.
Mhm.
What am I going to get out of it? Something I come back to a lot is in relation of how we're affected by cities and how we're affected by green space in cities, right? Out of the conversation of like, yeah, we feel good when we're in them, but what about it does it do for us emotionally in the context of like, does it help with depression? Does it help with whatever you want to think about it? I always go back to a point when I first visited Japan by myself. I did it for a month, quit my job as a whole thing. I was in a 25 quarter life crisis, you could call it. I had to do something big. I was in Tokyo, and at that time, I was the largest city I'd ever been to. It's huge, tall skyscrapers, like ones you like crank your neck up to look at. It's like, oh, that hurts my neck. Shadows across the street onto the other buildings that big. And it was amazing, but I'm not a city person. But I will say, the moment I saw this bamboo kind of look like a foresty vibe thing between these two tall skyscrapers, I had a pathway that just kind of, this force of energy pulled you in, walked all the way in, and there was just this wall of silence. There were people eating in there and, resting on their lunch breaks, but you didn't hear the hustle and bustle behind you that was like 10 feet away, or however many meters that is. But it was this moment of clarity where it's like all this stuff just went in my brain and bing. I was like, whoa, I get it. I get this component of stillness and quiet. There's a term in Japanese called komorebi, which is the inexplainable feeling or sensation you get seeing light shining through trees or leaves. And that identity of stillness creates a dynamic of understanding to represent your happiness. That's my opinion on it. And so I'm truly happy in silence, but I'm also truly happy listening to podcasts and music and breathes. I think there
Yeah.
is a component where we do need to have that quiet time, because
Mhm.
if we don't, we miss something that the tree may be telling us is like, oh, did I bend that too far? I couldn't hear the juniper going pop, pop, pop in the live tissue, right? I'm sure we've all been there. It's like, oh crap, can't go back now. Keep going forward. But for me, bonsai has cured my depression when I have it. I always go to my trees. I've dealt with depression my whole life. I actually had some pretty bad depression the ending of last year. I don't need to go into it, but once I got back to my trees, even just talking with them or being in the presence of them, it really pulled me back out of this complicated thinking, when you have depression. I think that's a big component always try to help people with as well. If you're depressed, sad, or otherwise, go into nature. Go bathe in nature. Do the Japanese
Mhm.
approach of shirin-yoku, nature bathing. It's always a
Well,
component.
I think, to your point of the depression and everything, when it comes to things like that, there's a lot of things like meditation, they
Mm.
talk about box breathing, it slows
Mhm.
your heart rate down and that slows everything down. And that can be really good for the body and for your health as well. And I think that when you're working on a bonsai tree, you are almost meditating without knowing that you're in that active meditation, because nothing
Exactly.
about bonsai is fast. Like, you're not
Mhm.
moving your arms real fast, or, you're not doing anything real fast, really. You're really just pruning slowly, and your breathings come right down, your heart rate comes down. And it's like, when you're talking about the city is one of those things. So like Sydney here, for example, when I get to Sydney, everything raises, heart rate rises, like
Mhm.
your awareness of everything around you rises, like your body almost goes into overdrive trying to keep up with the smells, the sights, the sounds, like the senses.
Go,
You're
go,
trying
go, go,
to,
go, right?
that's right. So your heart rate's like pumping and like everything's just getting worked. Whereas when you're sitting there working on a bonsai tree and like Ryan said, you're sitting there, you're listening to the birds, there's silence, you're not moving real fast, that's almost, I would argue, is a form of meditation.
Yeah, I definitely could see that. And what I hear is that a lot of people have difficulty meditating because they think it's like, oh, I just sit here, I close my eyes, and I think of nothing. I think of blackness. But from my understanding, a couple podcasts I've listened to is that the goal of meditation is not to think of nothing, it's to calm your mind and see what comes up. And
Mhm.
doing bonsai, if you are doing it in a way, let's say today I didn't feel like listening to podcasts. If I'm just doing it and being kind of quietly reflective subconsciously while I'm doing it, you'll get that same effect for sure. You'll just see what comes up, what's weighing on you, what you need to think about.
Well, I think in meditation, those thoughts that come up, they're not forced. They're once you slip into that state of meditation, that slowed heart rate, that calm, I think it just happens. And I find that the same thing happens to me if I'm working and I'm in that slowed state of mind, even if I'm listening to a podcast, I find that sometimes my thoughts just slip in out of nowhere and take over. And
Mhm.
the next minute you're looking at the podcast like I've just missed 15 minutes of
Then
this
you got to
podcast. I got to take
rewind.
a
Yeah,
bath.
Yeah, yeah.
that does happen to me a lot too.
Same.
So I think that you could argue that bonsai is a form of meditation because
Mhm.
that's almost what meditation is. It's just a state of calm where your thoughts take over and you don't even realize you're doing it until you kind of come out of that trance almost.
Hmm.
I kind of have a goal for myself where going in this year and due to the progress of my bonsai work, being that we're going into summer, opposite of you guys in Australia, obviously, I want to have more presence to be in quieting my mind where I'm not having to listen to music as a distraction. Like I have ADD really bad, so I've always grown up with background music. And living in the city or within the vicinity of the city, it's hard not to have that. Well, I mean, so you want to block out the cars and the motorcycles or whatever. I want to be in the position where I'm just focusing on the tree and just hearing nothing but myself or the tree. That's really hard. I know in Japan, the people that do the apprenticeships, they have to have that. There isn't much music being played. It's just all the time, them in the tree, and then probably being berated by their by their master.
Hmm.
But that's a goal for myself. I mean, how do you all set goals in relation to finding your peaceful work that brings you joy within your bonsai?
For me,
Well,
it's kind of, oh, go, you want to go first, Josh?
oh, sorry, the Zoom always has that weird delay.
Yep, yep.
um, but I was just gonna put one more point into what
Mm.
Kevin was talking about there about the background music. Um, I can't even remember now if it was in this chat or the one that we've just had over on the Modern Bonsai podcast. But you guys brought up Hugh from Tree Makers.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, I remember, man, this would have been like 5 or 6 years ago now, when before Hugh was at the place that he's at now, we were just having a private conversation in his garden. um, and at the time, we were talking about wondering what affects listening to music at the same time as working on your trees has on the tree and how the tree turns out. So if
Yeah.
you're listening to something that's a little bit more hardcore and aggressive like I would listen to,
Hmm.
is that tree going to end up with a little bit more of a hardcore and aggressive edge to it? You
Hmm.
know,
It may
Exactly.
embolden you, the artist, to make a little bit more radical decisions or something.
yeah. And
Mhm.
if you listen to something that's a little bit more slowed down and calming, is that going to
Mhm.
reflect on the tree? Are you going to put softer lines into the tree, or you know what I
Mm.
mean? Like,
Mhm.
Mm.
I could
this is
definitely
not
see
something.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not something that I've ever played with. It's just, I don't know, when you said that, it just triggered that memory of Hugh and I talking about that. It's like, I remember that conversation we had about listening to music and
This
what
one
an
time
effect.
talking with Hugh.
This one time in Hugh camp.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny the random things you never think about it again, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I remember 10 years ago we were talking about something like that. But uh and speaking of, I almost forgot your question, Kevin. So what was your question again?
Basically, like, how do you all make your goals to find your personal bonsai approach, but also to be like peace with your results, or
Hmm.
you're okay with the not totally finished idea of what you had?
Okay, gotcha.
Because that can be
So
stressful, you know?
yeah. Yeah, I think for me, what I was gonna say is it's kind of like a feeling. If I've gone too long without working on a tree, I just know that I need to make some time for that, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and so that's why it's good to have some tropical trees. You can break up the winter that way. I've talked about it before, scratching the bonsai itch, you know. Um, but I think also one other relevant point of this conversation about kind of the mental benefits of bonsai is what would we be doing if we weren't doing bonsai, you know? Nowadays, there's a lot of people spending a lot of time online on social media. I think I heard a study that was saying like the average teenager in the UK is spending like 4 hours on TikTok. And, you know, I'm not saying that social media is all bad, but certainly maybe some bad. Maybe it's not good to overstimulate your brain all the time, you know, or or you hear stories about people kind of getting radicalized by spending too much time online. But if you're being spending 4 hours a day with a tree, the worst that's going to happen with you is you're going to appreciate nature a little bit more and like learn a little bit more about the natural systems, you know?
Radicalized the other way.
Yeah.
You live longer.
Live
Yep.
right. Mm,
Yeah, I don't know. I can't do social media and stuff like that. Like one thing I can't stand is typing on a phone.
Hmm.
mm,
And
Yeah.
people tend to get the wrong idea about me. Like you talk to me like we're talking now, and I'll talk your ear off. I'll be sociable, I'll be friendly,
mm,
and that's something you can't get through a phone either. You can't get emotion portrayed. And one thing
Hmm.
I can't stand is typing on a phone. So when people will message me, it'll be like this really short message because by the time I get a sentence in, I'm done. I'm over it. And
mm,
and that's the part where I struggle with my business is social media. And that's what I
Hmm.
need. I need a social media manager because while I have these weeks where I'm like, this week I'm going to be all over my social media. I'm going to post a photo every day. I'm going to do
mm,
like a YouTube snippet or a podcast snippet.
Hmm.
And it's like after that week, it's like 6 months before I do it again.
Yeah.
And it's like, because I'm just, I don't know. I I don't know if you would diagnose it or something. I don't really diagnose things, but you would be surprised at how many movies I haven't seen because I can't sit still and watch a movie. I get
mm.
10, 20 minutes in and suddenly my mind's off. I'm like looking at the bricks on the wall thinking, I wonder if those gaps in between the bricks are like evenly measured or like
Squirrel,
that's
squirrel, shiny.
that's kind of just what my head does. And unless I'm really into something, then I could sit there and watch bonsai videos for hours.
Hmm.
I could watch
Yeah,
like
yeah.
videos of people building cars for hours.
Hmm.
Anything else, I can't do it. Like I can't all these movies that come out of like Iron Man or whatever that people talk about, I
Hmm.
can't sit there and watch them. They bore the living shit out of me. But they're like these multi-million dollar movies that they put so much effort into sound design and costumes and
Hmm.
filming, and I'm just like, this is the most boring thing I've ever watched.
Yeah, that can kind of go to show like everybody's got different tastes. And you know, when you're teaching, I try to make things interesting for people or try to capture people's attention, but you're never gonna be able to make it interesting for 100% of the people. Everybody learns a little bit differently, kind of gets entertained a little bit differently, gets stimulated differently. So, but I guess bringing it back to bonsai, we all have that in common. So at least like the working on a tree, everybody can kind of relate at that central point. But
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I wonder too if social media, because you're talking about these people that spend 4 hours on TikTok, or, they're on Instagram, and
Mhm.
all these people are posting photos with filters and
Mm,
all this kind of stuff. And what they get from that is like this warped perspective of what life is actually like welcome
mhm.
to the real
Right.
world, punk, because
Yeah.
without those
Right.
filters and everything,
Mm.
none of that shit exists. And I'm wondering if that's going to have an effect on bonsai, because now
Mm.
it could be used for good, for bad, but people could be going on social media and looking at bonsai and getting this warped perspective of what bonsai is, or how much work actually goes into that bonsai tree. They see trees from Japan and they don't understand that that's like a fourth generation tree that's 400 years old. And, and even with AI now, like
I was just gonna say AI. Yeah.
there was a guy on Facebook today just asking people for their opinions on, should I cut this branch off? Should I do that? This. I took that picture that he put up of his tree, went into Photoshop, and quickly just like circled around the branch. AI, remove this branch. And then I
Mm,
got the
Mm.
branch from above it, cut it out, moved it down, and then went around that. AI, fill in the background. And in the end, I was able to show him the exact idea that I was thinking about his tree. Cut that branch off, move that one back down, do this, do that.
Mhm.
But the thing is, if somebody else sees that photo, they don't realize that that's a doctored photo.
yeah.
Right. Right. Especially if it's their first time seeing or introduction to bonsai. So I want that, but not knowing, like you said, the guidelines that follow to get there.
Mm.
Mm.
And
And the ideas that I was giving him, it's like a 4 or 5 year process to get to what I
Yeah.
created in 10 minutes.
The
mhm.
instant gratification is not bonsai. It's
And
close
there
to the
is,
conifer.
yeah, but there is also this idea talking about the impact of social media and filters and all these other possible ways, if you're consuming a lot of social media, they say that comparison is the thief of joy. And there's
Mm.
another similar phrase like the grass is always greener. And if you're always looking at other people's trees, maybe you're not spending enough time working on your trees. So you kind of want to be doing it in moderation, I guess, is how I approach my social media diet anyways. Um, but yeah,
That's a
I
good
think
point. Yeah.
mhm.
Well, it's like
I was
these kids that
gonna,
go on YouTube and watch other kids play video games.
I
Yeah,
don't get
yeah.
that. I'm
I
just
used
like,
to do that a
how?
little bit, but I when I did it, I was watching to learn like the tips from the professionals, like, okay, how do
Mm.
I get past this level or things like that. But it can be entertaining if you like build a relationship with the person streaming, a pseudo social relationship, where you kind of feel like you get to know them. So I don't fault people who do that, but at the same time, I got into doing it because I enjoyed playing video games. So I wasn't stopping playing video games to do that entirely.
Yeah.
Ryan, you were mentioning earlier, just a couple of seconds ago, about quotes. The grass is greener. There's a band, well, Soundgarden, lead singer Chris Cornell. He's since passed away, sadly, but there's a lyric in one of his songs that says, "The grass is always greener where the dogs are shitting." And
That's the part you don't
and
see. Yeah.
yeah, right. It's like that makes sense in regards of there's shit and then there's the green, right? And you know, through all the stuff we've been through with COVID and 2020, whatever we think about it, how did that affect Australia? Because I know you all had the World Bonsai Convention, I believe in 2020 or was it 2021? And
That was the virtual.
yeah, because it was during
Mm.
the pandemic stuff. Because I remember seeing Suzuki's online and stuff and everything else, right?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what year it was. Um, but yeah, that was definitely a different dynamic.
Because do you feel that more people, as in the States, it's shown with some data that's been published now since 2020, as it's been what now 4 years or so. There was a mass amount of people that got back into plants or into bonsai specifically. I know people who are my peers in school. They may be quite younger than me, but a lot of them actually switched their majors from business over to horticulture
Mm.
or economics to plant sciences. I was like, wow, that's a big shift, but they're happier. They're like, oh, I found plants. Like people found cooking and baking, right?
Hmm.
Did you see with you having nursery, online sales, whatever you were doing, did you have more people coming to you specifically to learn more about your bonsai practice or for them to get involved more, help you out even?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I actually had the data to see it.
Oh, nice.
Um, yeah, so as COVID was starting, like any other business, I was like, oh man, here we go. Like, put your seatbelt on, you know, kind of squirrel away all your nuts because
Hmm.
you don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of months. And then we had some pretty harsh lockdowns here and some rules and things like that that shut a lot of businesses down, a lot of restaurants, a lot of brick and mortar stores were just going under left, right, and center. Where for me, it had the opposite effect. During COVID, my business was growing 300% year over year.
Wow.
And it was just
Indeed.
like, yeah, this upward spiral of, wow, all these people have just found bonsai again. And even still now, I don't know whether it directly relates to COVID or not, but I have a lot of people that come into the nursery and they're like, oh, I had bonsai 20 years ago and I'm just kind of starting to get back into it now. So,
Mm.
and it's like, yeah, I wonder.
Would you say your business growth has more like evened out now to where it's actually like, okay, this is normal compared to this surge where it's like, okay, we can't ride this high all the time because it has to come back down economics wise, right? The base model is always going to be you can only ride so high until the ship runs out of gas. You
Yeah,
know,
that's right. And we're we're in a moment at the moment in Australia where our cost of living is just it's stupid. It's a joke.
astronomical. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we've got two major supermarkets here in this country that own the whole entire market and
Oh
Hmm.
wow.
yeah, their profits have just gone through the roof. Like we do our grocery shopping once a week here and it costs upwards and over $200 per week. And I'm not even lying when I say we get like maybe 5 or 6 bags of groceries, and those bags aren't full. There may be only 2 items in a bag if it's we're talking about bottles of drink or whatever.
Mm.
Um, and then on top of that, we have insane rent increases. The people who own their homes are having massive why am I having a mind blank? Interest increases
Hmm.
Mm.
to the point where, some of them can't afford their mortgages. So at the moment, we're kind of on that downward trajectory again. So it's like as a business, now you've got to find a way to counteract that, you know.
Hmm.
Mhm.
It's one of those things in business. You have these ebbs and flows and
Supply and
there's things
demand. Yeah.
yeah, there's these things that are just always out of your control that, are forcing the hand on that. So now it's like people come into the nursery and they still want a bonsai tree, but they want the gift trees.
Hmm.
That's the area of
Mm.
the tree that they kind of gravitate towards. And you kind of like you talk to them and you try to explain, look, these aren't really bonsai trees in the bigger, grander scheme of things,
Mm.
but they get you into it. And, you know, like when we were talking about in the last episode about mindset, it kind of doesn't matter anyway, because when you're new in bonsai, even the simplest tree is the most magical tree you've ever seen.
Hmm.
Right. Right.
Even
Right.
if it's a stick in a pot that's got no ramification, it's still the most magical thing you've ever
The
seen. So it doesn't really matter.
naiveness. I miss it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Been soured.
But yeah, that
Uh,
kind of brings up a good point, Josh, that there's all these things going on in the world that add to our stress, like and even money stress, like inflation, as you were talking about. But bonsai, we talked about a lot of the ways that bonsai can benefit the people that practice it, but it can also be something that you can do in a self-sustaining way. Like people can dig their own trees, people can start plants from seed, or in one thing that if you have a good local club or a local community, people can trade trees around, trade soil for trees, different things like that. So it can be kind of like maybe it's a little bit of an expensive hobby to get into at first, but over time you can do it in a more sustainable way if you choose to do it that way. So
Mhm.
that could be another benefit of doing bonsai, I guess.
Well, once again, it's a slow boil. So
Hmm.
as you get into bonsai, you don't need the handcrafted pots or the tokonoma pots or anything like that.
Hmm.
You don't need antique Chinese pots that cost
Yeah.
thousands of dollars. You don't need, juniper stock that costs $2,000.
Hmm.
Yeah.
As a
Yeah.
beginner, you just need the basics. And if you've got a set of pruning shears, happy days.
Yeah. Use
Yeah.
regular pliers, not gym pliers.
Yeah, like you can get away with all that kind of stuff starting off. And then once again, that's where the mindset in bonsai kicks in of like, okay, now I'm getting a bit more advanced. Now I can't use those
Mhm.
regular pliers because they literally don't fit in between the fine ramified branching.
Hmm.
Where do you see bonsai going in Australia now? Post 2020, all this growth, the ebbs and flows as people go into it and then they have life and maybe they get out of it for a bit. Like you said, the gentleman was like 20 years ago, he did it and now he's getting back in.
Yep.
Specifically for your representation, as you have a nursery, you're right in the thick of it. Where do you see bonsai in Australia as a cultural context, countrywide, whole thing? People, where is it going?
The thing I love about bonsai is the people that get into it that you do not think are going to get into it.
Right.
Like here in Australia, we have these guys who have this image of kind of don't mess with me, I'll knock your teeth out kind of thing.
Well, burly dudes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you got burly dudes covered in tattoos. Maybe some of them will have big beards, some missing teeth, or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
But then they see a bonsai tree and you see their whole goddamn soul light up. And it's like, okay, like this is kind of one of those things where you wouldn't have thought about that guy. It was about a year ago. Yeah, about a year ago, our solar system on the house got really badly damaged in hail and everything, like busted up all the solar panels. And
Hmm.
it was a really old, shitty system anyway. So we got the thing completely overhauled. So new inverter, new panels, everything, new wiring. And the dudes were here for like 2, 3, 4 days, whatever it was, I can't remember, up on the roof. And the whole time they were up on the roof, they were looking down on my collection.
Probably a nice
And
view.
these are some dudes who like covered in tattoos, like your typical Australian tradie when they're up on the roof there, you almost need to bleep out every word they say and,
When's the
you know,
smoko?
just getting ready to go home and have a beer but every single one of them, when they finished, they came into the nursery and they're like, we've got to buy one of these things. These are so cool. And then it was to the point where just before Christmas this year, one of the dudes come back and he bought himself a second bonsai tree.
Nice. You might have
And
a new customer.
that's right. And that's where I see it going in Australia. I think it's going to be a widespread thing where it's not just seen as an old man, or even like it used to be just seen as an old Japanese man hobby. And
Exactly.
then it was like it's just an old man hobby. It
Yeah,
kind
old
of dropped
persons
that.
Mhm.
anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just kind of dropped that Japanese thing, and now it's moving into it's an anybody hobby. Like it doesn't matter
Yeah.
who it is.
Mhm.
But that would be the cultural side of it, where it doesn't matter in this country whether you're black, white, or whether you're somebody who's moved here from China or Japan or
Mm.
the Middle East, or doesn't matter where you're from. They all love it. The Vietnamese in this country, they love bonsai. You
Mhm.
know, they're a big part of the market here, the Vietnamese. So they all love it. But then when it comes to bonsai itself, the big separation you see in those people, and this is where the tug of war of bonsai is like kind of going back and forth,
Mm.
is those who practice traditional Japanese and then those who practice just anything really.
I was gonna
Because
ask, yeah.
in Australia, a lot of Australians you meet, they have a very laid back kind of demeanor against anything. You know, a lot of Australian people is like, you'll always hear them say, ah, it is what it is, or she'll be right. Ah, don't worry about her. Like, you'll hear that a lot from Australians, and that's not just Australians trying to be Australians. Like, you can get Australian people that try and push the whole Australian thing, and they'll really start putting on the accent and being like, oh, yeah, she was mad as a cut snake. And, you know, they really try and put it on. And it's
Mhm.
like, even as Australians, we can listen to that and go, yeah, that's kind of just
Bollocks.
yeah, that's somebody just trying to put it on.
Mm.
But there is that Australian mentality of she'll be right. Yeah, don't worry about her. You know, she'll be fine.
Is
That
there a
kind of
big push
thing.
for natives? With people working with natives now?
People are scared to shit, like of natives. They just
Mm.
not all people, but there's this I don't know, there's this
Or native material, right?
there's this mentality around natives of like people have heard things like you can't cut their roots because they'll die. Or
Mm.
you
Hmm.
can't do this and that. Where when people say that to me, I say, you're mad because our Australian natives are in the environment they want to be in. They've got the best chance of any species we work with. We work with junipers or black pines, or for example, Japanese maples here. They hate it
Mm.
because they're in
Mm.
this really foreign environment that they don't understand. They don't get winter dormancy. They get
Mhm.
this really hot,
Yep.
arid summer that doesn't have a lot of humidity, and they start shriveling up, and
Yeah.
you know,
Like,
and
help
that's
me.
all. Yeah, where the Australian natives, they're where they want to be. They love it. This is home to them. So we can, but we've just got to learn how to work with them a little bit differently. Like the pruning might be a little bit different.
Mhm.
The repotting, our natives, they tend to grow in ebbs and flows that happen all year round. So from
Mm.
spring, they'll grow, then they'll stop growing. Then they'll grow again, then they'll stop growing. And they do that the whole year. They do that through winter. You'll have a new flush of growth on an Australian native come out in winter.
Wow.
Mm.
I've had
Maybe they,
flowers come out in winter.
yeah, maybe they
Wow.
prefer the colder time of year because it's not the blistering hot. So,
As they're
But
not extending resources, maybe. Who knows?
mm.
yeah, but they do this all throughout the year, just ebbs and flows. And
Mm.
we've found that if we repot the trees in between one of those downtimes, we have a little bit more success.
Mhm.
Um, and Australian natives too, they have this really cool defense mechanism that no other tree, at least that I know of, and I'm happy to be corrected, but at least no other tree that I know of outside of Australian natives, they have this defense mechanism, whereas if they don't think they're getting adequate water, they drop
Mm.
every leaf on the tree and they'll
Oh,
just
so it's
wait.
like a early senescence of dropping like you would in fall.
It's almost like they know they're not getting water, so they
Yeah.
drop that one thing that causes them to lose water.
Right,
Mm.
because it's preservation. Yeah.
Yeah, so then they store water until they see that they're getting a nice flow of water again. They're getting that resource back. So they've got this ability to say, okay, well, I lose water through my leaves. So until I begin to get water into my roots, I'm going to drop every leaf I have and I'm just going to wait. And they can wait
Mm.
up to 6 months
The
Wow.
only
before they'll put
tree
it.
I was gonna say the only tree I could think of that I've had experience with myself is a willow. Um,
Yeah.
in relation of that, my landlord had a willow clump, basic small planting in a pot that had been sat outside for like a year, and it had died. I just kept watering, and now it's better than it was. And he calls it the zombie
Mm.
tree because it was like dead. I was like, but wait, there's more, right? That's right. Oh, what's the name of the tree that you're talking about from Australia, the native?
Or are there
Um,
multiple that do it?
oh,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
A lot of them do it. So, like,
Okay.
whether it's Melaleuca, I've had a lot of
Yeah,
Melaleucas do it.
those look so cool.
Um, uh, Lily Pilly. Don't
Mm.
know why it took me
Never
so
heard
long to
that one.
think of that.
No, we
The
learned of
tea
that one
tree.
with Hugh. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Here we
Yeah.
did.
So I've got two good examples of that. So Melaleuca, at my old nursery, I had benches of Melaleucas, and some of them had fallen off the back of the benches that I didn't realize that they'd fallen off. So they were laying sideways on the ground, hadn't had water for a long time. By the time I got to them, all the growth was all dried up and, looked like the tree was dead. Any normal person would throw it out, be done with it. You pick them suckers back up, start watering them. 2 months later, off they go again. But I also had some lily pillies, right? And where I had these lily pillies, they were next to this bigger tree. And this bigger tree started dropping branches all of a sudden. And I couldn't figure out why until it dropped this one big branch. And I looked up the middle of the branch, and the ants had actually tunneled all through the tree. And it was
Wow.
causing it to get so weak that it was breaking off.
Mhm.
Now, these same little ants had decided to get into the pots of the lily pillies, and I hadn't realized that they'd gotten in there. And the lily pillies started to look really sick. And I'm thinking, man, they're getting water, they're getting fertilized, they're getting sunlight. What could it be? So always first thing you do is pop the tree out of the pot and have a look at the roots, because that's going to tell you probably 90% of your issues. When I popped them out, there was just ants everywhere.
Mhm.
So one of them, I managed to get most of the ants out, put some new soil in, and it kind of just kept trucking. The other one, I did the same thing, but the ants had got to that a little bit more substantially. So did the same thing, put new soil in, put it in, but the tree had dropped all its leaves. And for like a month and a half, it didn't shoot back. Maybe might have even been 2 months. And I thought, well, maybe that tree's done for. And this is before I knew how damn determined these trees were. So this one lily pilly, it had nice movement in it. So I threw it up the side of the house, and I thought maybe one day I can just pull that dead wood back out, wrap something around it, and I might have a nice tanuki or something. So anyway, probably about 7 or 8 months had passed. I had this lady that had come into the nursery, and she's like, "Oh, I'd really love a nice piece of deadwood to work with." And I was like, "I think I've got just the thing for you. I'll be right back." Ran up the side of the house, and I'm not shitting you, this lily pilly had taken off, and it was just like massive growth everywhere. Hadn't had sun. It was only getting water that was dripping off the side of the gutters. And like I came back out with it, and I was like, well, I was going to give you the trunk of this tree, but turns out this thing wanted to live.
Like,
Yeah,
that's
that kind
amazing.
of
That's wow.
that brings up a good point. I guess to grow native species for bonsai, that ties in with our whole conversation about how bonsai helps you reconnect with nature. What better way to reconnect with nature than to learn about your native species and like what's in your own backyard and these plants that are the most adapted for your area. But it's a very, I guess, surprising thing to learn. Every species has their own preferences. So to grow your own natives in these things that don't have established bonsai techniques, you have to be willing to try things. You have to be willing to fail at things sometimes and be willing to be surprised sometimes. But I had one more question about this phenomenon that you're seeing with the native species dropping their leaves. So have you ever tried it as like a really quick way to defoliate a tree? Just like stop watering it for a week or two and then after all the leaves are gone, start watering again like normal. Have you ever done that?
Well, I haven't done it on the watering side, but I did accidentally make a few of my natives deciduous one winter.
Hmm.
Um,
Wow, it's the
so
evergreen no more.
yeah, well, what had happened is I was doing these trials of one winter I would spray the garden with lime sulfur, and then
Mhm.
the next I wouldn't, just to see what the effects of that would be.
Mhm.
And spoiler alert, the years that I didn't spray for lime sulfur at the start of winter, the start of spring, I had really bad pest infestations of like aphids and things.
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
that lime sulfur spray in winter is definitely a winner. But one thing I never did was spray the natives, because our natives don't really succumb to pests. And this is
Mm.
not something that I figured out why. I have a thought that it might be the tea tree oil that's in some of them. Maybe
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
pests don't like
Yeah.
that. Um, The only real pest that we suffer with natives is like borers. They get into like the trunks and they create all these holes, and
Hmm.
they're a bit of a pain in the ass when it comes to natives. But so for that reason, I'd never really worried about doing the natives when it came to the lime sulfur. But this one winter, I was just like, whatever, I'll just try it and see what happens. Well, what happens was is they all went deciduous with the rest of the trees. So they one morning I came out and there's all these tea trees and bottle brush and thing, and none of them have got any leaves on them. And I'm like, oh shit, what? And then like I had to quickly think, like, what's changed? Why have none of these trees got leaves? And I thought, the lime sulfur. They really didn't like it.
Mhm.
So I've never sprayed lime sulfur on them again, but they did come back stronger than they did before, and it didn't really
Hmm.
work as a defoliating technique because it just kind of, I don't know, made them
Took
come back
off.
with a vengeance.
Gave them a
Sure.
rest, and then they're like, I'm ready to go again.
But I think the point was is, you asked me before about do people work with natives, and I'm telling you that a lot of people are kind of scared of them, and I think one thing that they're scared of is they repot them and then the tree loses all its leaves and they go, oh, I've killed it.
Mhm.
But
Hmm.
that's the
Hmm.
tree's defense mechanism. I can't pull up water, so I don't want to lose any water. So I'm going to get rid of the thing that makes me lose water. And we know already that that is a technique in bonsai repotting in aftercare.
Mhm.
Junipers, pines, whatever, these things that can't lose their leaves, after we repot, we need to slow down transpiration. That's just the native's way of slowing down its transpiration. And
Hmm.
I've done it. I've done it quite a few times. Like I've been told time and time again, tea trees, you can't cut the root ball of them because they die. Well, I've taken tea trees from big growing pots and put them into tiny little pots where I've cut maybe 70% of the root ball off, and I've still got those trees to this day. Actually, every single one of my tea trees I've got in my collection, I've gone straight from the grower's pot into a small bonsai pot with no issues. And I was actually talking to Ryan Neal about this because we um, spoke about on our podcast about having almost a blank canvas for natives in the fact that not only do we really not know what we're doing with them in terms of horticulture, but we also have this blank canvas in terms of styling because when you look at a juniper, no matter what, there's this preconceived notion of what that juniper should look like.
Hmm.
When you look at a pine, there's this preconceived notion of what that pine should look like. Now, you can go against that preconceived notion and design that pine or juniper however the hell you want. That's fine. But if you're somebody who's taken inspiration from junipers from Japan and pines from Japan, you're always going to have this branch down kind of mentality. This is how they should be structured kind of thing. We don't have that with natives. What we have is what we see out in nature. But I tend to push back on that a little bit because there's a lot of people who do take that and run with it. You hear a lot of, oh, when you see a tea tree in nature, it does this. When you see a kunzia in nature, it does this. When you see a bottle brush, this is what they do. And it's like, well, let's just try and see what happens if we do them in the traditional Japanese aesthetic. And I've done that with Australian natives and they look cool. Like they look unreal. And it's just that Japanese aesthetic of, whether it's right, left, back, or it's whatever it may be. I've got tea trees out there that are informal upright. I've got a cascade one. Um, I've got some more kind of natural, holistic kind of style ones where I'm kind of letting it do its thing.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, that's Australian natives in a nutshell, really. A lot of people are scared of them. The people who aren't scared of them are kind of coming at them design wise with a more open palette because they're not confined by that preconceived notion of what it should be.
Mhm.
I would argue that some people are still bound a little bit by what they are supposed to look like in nature, and that can kind of also constrict you a little bit as well
Is
if
that
you're
also
following.
dependent on like location? Because Australia's pretty big, right? And you have a surplus of trees native in a
Hmm.
different climates. So are they growing differently in different climates?
Yeah. Well, I mean, take the Kunzia, for example. You see that a lot along the coastlines, close to like beaches and things like that. So a lot of the Kunzias that you see are very like windswept, very
Hmm.
heavy leaning to one side. They can be very sparse because they just get blown with wind a lot. They are very rugged and sometimes twisted. So for me, at least anyway, when I think of a Kunzia, that's the image I see. I see like this kind of windswept to one side, coastal, growing off a rock kind of deal. But
Mm.
then when I think about like bottle brush, for example, bottle brush you see a lot on like farms and like farms that have like creeks and rivers and
Hmm.
things that run through them, and they grow a lot off the creek beds. So you tend to see a lot of these bottle brushes that they have this really exposed root structure because they're hanging off like a riverbed, and the riverbed starts to erode, and it kind of exposes more and more of that root thing. So yeah, you can get these preconceived notions of what those trees should look like.
Mhm.
Right.
That's
Right.
that's one thing that I want to kind of bring up, I guess. So taking inspiration from nature, I do that a lot. But the more environments you go to, you can always find a tree that will surprise you that doesn't look like all the other ones of that species, but it was in nature, so it's natural. So they don't always have to be like, just because you're doing it in a naturalistic style doesn't mean that it has to look the same every time. But I mean, there's kind of like a foundation of ideas where you kind of are making a natural story behind why the tree grew this way. But I think at the same time, it's good to have an open mind, and especially if you see someone that styled a tree in a way you didn't expect, maybe ask them what led them to do that, like what was their inspiration. And it's totally fine, whatever the answer is, you can style your tree in any number of ways. If it's healthy, it tolerated it. So that's one thing I think people need to be careful of is jumping to conclusions and being closed-minded about acceptable styles, because really it is an art and there's many variations in nature, but there's also many variations in human imagination. So it could be, you could turn up with many different types of styles, pretty much.
Yeah, and like we spoke about in the last episode about bonsai mindset and that whole taking inspiration from nature thing, I think you've got to approach that very carefully because it can be dangerous. Um,
Mm.
and it's dangerous in terms of horticulture. So if you try and treat a tree in a bonsai pot like it's getting treated in nature, you're probably not going to have a real good time with that tree. There's also the point of where do you draw the line? And this might be an unpopular opinion here, but I'll put my neck out on the line for this one. But where do you draw the line of saying, I look at trees in nature to take inspiration? Because to me, bonsai is an art where you use the tree to express yourself. And to me, and this is me personally, but I've never looked at a tree in nature and gone, that would make a cool bonsai. Because it
Mm.
wouldn't. Because what we do in bonsai is we manipulate the tree to fit what our perfect ideation of that tree is aesthetically.
Mhm.
Mm.
That's why we contort these things with wire and everything. If we wanted to practice bonsai naturally, I would just put a tree in a pot and never touch it. There's your natural tree.
Naturally
It's going to do
stunted. Yeah.
Right.
that
That's a good
tree's going
point.
to it's going to grow the way it's going to grow. It's going to put branches where it wants to put branches.
Mhm.
That's natural. But and that would be taking inspiration from a tree in nature because you're just letting that tree do its thing. And it's gonna do the whole phototropic thing where everything's just gonna grow up towards the sun. Or
Mhm.
if the sun's, over in that direction more favored, the tree's gonna grow in that direction.
Mhm.
So I've always wondered where you draw that line of I take inspiration from trees in nature because while I do say that, there are aspects of trees where you would take inspiration. Like there was one time where I was styling some of our tea trees to have a tenjin. just because when I looked out from my property, there was these trees that were all in this gully, and the tops of the trees would always get blasted with wind. So you'd have this really nice lush tree, but right at the top of it, you'd have all this just gnarly deadwood, and it looked cool. So I took inspiration from that and kind of forced it upon a tree that wasn't going to do that naturally because it wasn't getting that element in nature. So I kind of forced it upon it. So there are little elements where you look and go, oh, yeah, I'll take a little bit of inspiration from that. But how much inspiration do you really take from trees in the wild? And I know that Ryan Neal would have a lot to say about that, but he's also a lot more educated on that philosophical side of it than I am. I don't go that deep.
That's a lot to think about there.
That could be a whole nother episode.
I was gonna say that's a whole
we could
other
break down
episode. We
that
gotta get you
question.
on later. Oh, yeah.
Maybe what you guys need to do is have Ryan Neal on and ask him about that.
Someday.
Ryan, if
yeah.
you're listening, we'd love to have you. We're gonna have a podcast of two Ryans.
Because he would knock that out of the park.
Right.
Whereas I'm probably just ignorant, but in my ignorance, you kind of get another point of view, I guess.
Well, you need a certain amount of knowledge to pose the right question. And that's a question you could think about for a long time. And I don't know if you could ever come up with a 100% satisfying answer. You may get a lot of different answers, but yeah.
Or is related to your personality is reflected through your trees as well. And the way you view your life is through your personality and how people perceive you. So, there's a lot to take in. This has been a great episode. We thank you for your time. It's been a hot minute. This has been great.
It's
thank
now
you.
6:51 a.m. for those who care
7.
about behind the scenes EST.
Yeah, it's like,
and it's 9:51 p.m. for me here at night.
Yeah.
Nice. A nightcap and go to bed. No, where can people find you? What's your website? All the good stuff to know about you. Where are those things located?
So main website is bonsai-en.shop, but we also have bonsai-en.com.au.com, Bonsai-en without the dash in it.com. We bought all the domains.
Hard to get it wrong then.
So chances are whatever you type in, as long as it says Bonsai-en and it's got a .com and .au, whatever after it, something will come up. And then all our socials are just at Bonsai-en. We are on TikTok, but I find TikTok doesn't really work real well for bonsai, not as well as kind of Instagram and Facebook and that kind of thing does. But yeah, that's pretty much it. But just go to Google and type in Bonsai-en, and we pretty much cover the first 2 or 3 pages if you type in that query.
And is there anything that you're expecting to release this year that people should know about or keep an eye out for? As far as content or new trees coming in, if you're local or anything that way?
Yeah, at the moment, like I'm trying to get back into podcasting because I've been getting absolutely grilled by the people who used to listen to the podcast and now can no longer listen to the podcast because I haven't done an episode in, the longest time.
Been a minute.
Like it hasn't been a minute, it's been an hour.
It's hard to keep up with, especially you've got your whole online class and YouTube channel and everything else. So it's hard to keep everything consistently adding new content,
Yeah, and I do one-on-one Zoom sessions as well. And those sessions are 90% people from the US. So, there's a lot of time spent on Zoom with people, helping them with their trees. Some people want design aspects or, they want to ask how to get their tree looking a bit better or whatever. So, yeah, I'm very super busy with like Zoom, and I try to keep the YouTube content up. Like that's another thing that I get roasted about. Like, I mean, I can't complain about it, but people who enjoy the Bonsai-en brand get very passionate about it.
That's good. That's good.
And then if I start dropping the ball and, I'm not releasing videos or I'm not doing podcasts, they let me know about it.
They're like, where you at?
Well, here they get 2 episodes out of you, so one in each of our feeds.
They're going to be super thrilled about that. So I'll make sure that I credit you guys for that because it was you guys that reached out and
Oh, we thank you for the collaboration. We always try to encourage community growth, and that's why we started this, because it's just like, what more fun can you have than talking about what you love to do, and then meeting new friends across the world.
well, I think too, part of the reason I wanted to do it as well is because, so many people that are asking me to do podcasts and that still, at least my audience is going to find you now, and I can kind of hand them off a little bit to you guys and be like, look,
Yeah.
these guys are doing podcasts, so go and listen to them because while I'm still happy to do podcasting,
Yeah.
it might be a minute between episodes.
Yeah.
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 We appreciate that. And all of our listeners, you've got a great library of episodes too. I was kind of binging them preparing for this interview. I was like, wow, he had a lot of big names on his
Yeah.
episodes. I learned something from each of them. So
And you
And
know
I
what?
did, I was gonna say, and I
Uh,
did look at some of the previews of your courses. They're really good material. You have really good
yeah,
teaching explanations. So please keep it going.
yeah. Thank you. I would like to go back and actually do some of those podcast episodes because I just feel like, I don't know, you always feel like you're at your best now and you're like, man, if I had have
mm,
spoken to Ryan or Bjorn or, whoever it may have been now, I feel like I'd have a much better conversation. So who knows? Maybe one day.
yeah. Yeah, the thing that we're finding is every episode or every interview is different based on the moment of time that person is in, what topic we naturally gravitate towards or decide to focus on. So it may be better or it may just be different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if you listened to the episode that I did with Ryan,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
when we did that episode, he was here in Australia. I think that was in 2019. Or it might have been before that. I don't know. It was 2018, 2019, around there. And it was the dead middle of winter. It was like minus temperatures. Ryan had like an Airbnb and it was like him and Lime and
Mm.
Hugh was there. And he was like, yeah, I'm really keen to do your podcast. He's like, but the only time I've got while I'm here in Australia is like really early in the morning if you're keen. I
Mm.
was like, dude, I'll do early in the morning. I don't care. But it turns out that the coffee machine in the Airbnb it had like totally shit itself. So like I got there, he had no coffee, I had no coffee. It was freezing. It was like 5:30 in the morning. We're both we're sitting on the couch like, eyes half open, trying to do a half meaningful podcast. And I was like at the end of it, I was just like, dude, sorry. Like I hope something good came out of that.
Luckily, I couldn't tell at all when I listened to that
Yeah.
one.
I was
So I
like,
think you're in the clear.
Like kind of
cool.
one of those half asleep kind of things, but
Mhm.
you're your own worst critic, I think.
Mhm.
Mm, nice.
So
Uh,
we went over Bonsai-en, your website, your social media, and then your podcast. I think we mentioned the name maybe once or twice. It's Modern Bonsai Podcast, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
nice.
Yeah.
Josh, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation and creating bridges to other communities and cultures. I love it. I
I'm
love it.
glad we could make
Brian,
it work with the crazy time difference.
Yeah, no, it's
it's
my
only
pleasure.
time.
Mhm.
No, I love talking bonsai and you've got your little club there if you ever want to reach out and have me do a virtual talk or lecture for your club or something.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's a good idea. Yeah.
that'd be cool. That'd be cool. Yeah, we should look into that. We're both on the board, so we should look into that.
Yeah, that's something that I'm expanding Bonsai-en into hopefully soon is being able to do lectures at abroad bonsai
Hmm,
clubs without actually being there.
Yeah. I
nice,
mean, it
nice.
would be cool to have our first Australian guest artist for the club. So,
Great. That'd be cool.
mm.
Awesome. On that note, it's a wrap. Thank you. The Bonsai Time podcast is purely grown and horticulturally crafted by Kevin Ferris, Ryan Houston, and Kelly Louie. To find out more and see pictures about today's interview or sponsors, see the show notes linked in the description. Submit questions, suggestions, or tree pictures for future discussion episodes. Find the contact form on our website, bonsaitimepodcast.com, or message us directly at bonsaitimepodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support future episodes, please rate us, share episodes, donate, or become a sponsor. The music on today's episode was provided by Midi Cancer. To find more of their work, check out their SoundCloud and Bandcamp pages. To stay in touch with us, subscribe to the Bonsai-en Podcast on your favorite podcast app, Instagram, or YouTube, and Facebook. Contact us individually. Kevin's Instagram is Kevin_Ferris, PNW. Kelly's Instagram is Bonsai with Kelly. Ryan's website is invivobonsai.com, and his Instagram is invivobonsai. Thank you all, and remember, bonsai on!